Good morning to everyone. On behalf of Department of Neonatology, I welcome you all to today's session of CGR on congenital birth defects in an ICU, their spectrum and SGPGI experience. Starting with the burden of disease, as we can see that the congenital birth defects according to the Global Burden of Disease Study 2019 of neonatal and post-neonatal mortality. Talking of the burden according to the socio-demographic index, although congenital anomalies are among the top causes of neonatal mortality in high socio-demographic index countries, and their significance in the contribution to mortality in low and low middle income countries is not thought to be really high. But is that really correct? Talking of numbers, the Indian authors in 2021, using the modeled estimates from this Global Burden of Disease study, estimated the birth defect mortality from 1990 to 2017. And here are the results. We can see when converted to absolute numbers, over 70% of the deaths due to congenital birth defects are actually occurring in the low and low middle socio-demographic index countries. There is a clear evidence of transition in causes of neonatal mortality. Again, shown by the same authors, what we see in this image are the early neonatal death rate caused because of the common complications of neonatal period, including the preterm birth-related complications, neonatal encephalopathy due to birth asphyxia and trauma, neonatal sepsis, and congenital birth defects. And we can clearly see that the declining rate of the first three causes and a constancy in birth defect mortality rates explain the increasing contribution of birth defects to major causes of deaths in the early neonatal period. This again argues for the urgent need of a robust national birth defect surveillance system to know the true magnitude, type and the proportionate mortality occurring due to congenital anomalies in India and other lower middle income countries. Till recently, all these data have been extrapolated using the Global Burden of Disease study, and there is no national birth surveillance providing us the real estimates. Since then, in 2014, the WHO Southeast Asia Regional Office Newborn Birth Defect Database was hence created to create a data management system on newborn deaths, birth defects and the stillbirths. So at present, 150 hospitals amongst 8 countries are currently registered with this birth defect database. And amongst India, 54 hospitals from India are presently contributing to this database. The prevalence of visible major birth defects from 2014 till 2020 are estimated to be around 127 per 10,000 births in India. We would like to thank Dr. Neerja from AIIMS Delhi for providing us with this valuable data. And talking of the type of birth defects, the most common birth defects being identified include the neural tube defects and the musculoskeletal Talipes equinovarus. Hence, we know, and it is not just about the mortality. Many of these congenital anomalies are non-lethal, but the babies with these anomalies and defect continue to survive with disabilities and they need lifelong care. So, existence of this database is a must, seeing the increasing contribution of congenital anomalies to neonatal mortalities. Hence, we decided to bring forth this topic on this platform in front of all of you. And I would now like to request Dr. Preeti, our DM resident, to take you ahead with the further presentation covering under these following headings. Thank you.
So, the specific learning objectives for today's session is, first of all, definition, then classification and approach to congenital anomalies. Spectrum of cases from our NICU, SGPGI NICU experience and comparison with other similar global and national studies, and at last we will conclude with conclusions. So continuing with definition, a congenital birth defect is an outcome of abnormal morphogenesis. As per WHO, congenital anomalies are structural or functional anomalies that occur during intrauterine life. As per CDC, these are a wide range of abnormalities that are present at birth and are of prenatal origin. Under etiology of congenital birth defect, genetic cause contributes about 10 to 30% of cases, environmental factors contribute 5 to 10% of cases, while 20 to 35% are multifactorial and rest is unknown. Coming to classification of congenital birth defect, these can be classified as phenotypical birth defect or genotypical birth defect or both. On the basis of medical consequences, these may be major birth defect or minor birth defect. As per timing of insult, these may be classified as malformation, disruption or deformation. Under clinical classification, these are categorized into syndrome, association or sequence. So, first of all, classification of congenital birth defect as phenotypical or genotypical birth defect. So, this baby is having characteristic phenotypical flat faces along with flat nasal bridge with mongoloid slant of eyes along with prominent epicanthic fold. And the corresponding genotype of this baby was trisomy 21. So, this was diagnosed as a baby with Down syndrome. Then, on the basis of medical consequences, congenital birth defect can be classified as major birth defect or minor. Major birth defects have significant adverse implications on anatomical, functional, psychological and cosmetic well-being of an individual, while minor have only mild cosmetic effect. So, the baby in first image was admitted with soft mass over back and was diagnosed as having sacrococcygeal teratoma with Arnold-Chiari malformation type 2. And the baby in second image is having sacral pits, and this is an example of minor birth defect. Coming to malformations, these are non-progressive defects due to an intrinsically abnormal embryonic developmental process. First image is of a baby with bladder exostrophy with bifid penis and bifid scrotum. Baby was diagnosed as exostrophy epispadias complex with diphallus with left renal agenesis. Bladder template closure was done under our pediatric urology department, and post-op care along with neonatal complications were managed in our NICU. The second image is of a baby with malformed ear. Now coming to deformations. These are abnormalities of the position of body parts due to extrinsic intrauterine mechanical forces that modify a normally formed structure. And this baby is having left congenital talipes equinovarus as deformation defect. Baby was an outborn admitted in NICU with recurrent extubation failure, and Garbo defect was diagnosed as congenital heart disease. Baby was then operated under CBTS department. Now coming to disruptions, these are defects of organs or body parts that result from destruction of or interference with normal development. This baby was diagnosed as having constriction of left arm as a consequence of amniotic band sequence. Now, the next classification, that is syndrome, is a pattern of defect in which various anomalies occur together and are associated with a set number of signs and symptoms. So, this baby was having characteristic features like microbrachycephaly, bushy eyebrows, joint to eyebrows, that is synophrys, long smooth philtrum along with nail hypoplasia, and this baby was diagnosed as Cornelia de Lange syndrome. And the second image is of a baby with Acadi syndrome admitted with macrocephaly because of hydrocephalus and seizures. Baby also had microphthalmos and antevated nares with depressed nasal bridge, long smooth philtrum and sparse lateral eyebrows along with flat nasal bridge. Baby had developmental delay with blindness on follow-up. Baby is currently being managed in our OPD along with neurosurgery, ophthalmology and physiotherapy department. Next, sequence is a pattern of anomalies in which a single known defect in development causes a cascade of subsequent abnormalities. In Peri-Rabe sequence, which is a characteristic of sequence, micrognathia, that is retracted mandible, was the initial event which causes glossoptosis, that is retracted tongue, which in turn causes breathing problem due to obstruction of the upper airway. A wide U-shaped cleft palate is commonly also present. Association is a defect in which two or more anomalies that are pathogenetically not related occur together more frequently than expected by chance. So VACTERL is the classical example which constitute vertebral defect with anorectal defect along with cardiac defect, tracheoesophageal defect, renal and limb defect. So the X-ray represents coiling of orogastric tube suggesting esophageal atresia, and the second image is of a baby with imperforate anus, and third is limb defect. All may be present in VACTERL association. Now coming to developmental field defect, this is a pattern of anomaly in which is caused by disturbance of a region of the embryo that develops in a contiguous physical space. This region is known as a developmental field. So OS complex is a classical example of developmental field defect. First image is of a baby who was admitted with OS complex. Baby was born of a 31-year-old mother as twin delivery conceived through in vitro fertilization. Baby was having omphalocele, exostrophy of bladder, imperforate anus, and baby was also having diastomelia with sacral meningocele as spinal defect. Second image is post-operative image of same baby who was managed through multidisciplinary approach. Next, dysplasia is an abnormality in the growth and development of cell or tissue histology. If it occurs at cellular level, it is called as microscopic dysplasia. Example being bronchopulmonary dysplasia or fibrous dysplasia. If it occurs at organic level, it is called as macroscopic dysplasia such as renal dysplasia. This baby is having short arms and legs with an average size trunk and relatively large size head and was diagnosed as having achondroplasia. Next, approach to congenital birth defect. This is a sequential process. First step being clinical evaluation in form of history and physical examination, then baseline investigations along with detailed specific genetic testing, then analysis and diagnosis, then confirmation of diagnosis, then intervention in the form of treatment, counseling and prenatal diagnosis, and at last prevention of congenital birth defects. So, in history, we have to take prenatal, perinatal, neonatal, postneonatal as well as family history. Under prenatal history, inquiries about teratogenic exposures as infections, medications, drugs of abuse, maternal illness, radiation should be asked for along with prenatal complications and antenatal USG findings. Under perinatal history, presentation, mode, complications of delivery should be asked along with gestational age and Apgar score should be noted at birth, along with birth weight, birth length and head circumference. In neonatal course, history about feeding, activity and complications should be asked. In post-neonatal course, physical growth and developmental milestones should be assessed along with neurological symptoms, especially seizures, visual or hearing defects should be assessed. In family history, we have to take a detailed 3-generation family history along with pedigree chart. History of recurrent infertility or pregnancy losses should be asked along with medical records of previously affected babies or relatives, and history of consanguinity is at most important along with ethnic background. Under physical examination, we have to take detailed anthropometric measurement along with craniofacial profile and systemic examination along with examination of vertebral column, extremities and skin. Under investigations, we have to take radiographs along with neuroimaging to exclude CNS anomalies, a screening ultrasound of neonate along with 2D echo to exclude cardiac anomalies, and specific genetic testing as indicated according to history and physical examination of the baby. So, realizing the importance of birth defects and its implications, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare under Rashtra Bal Swasthya Karyakram launched this handbook for comprehensive newborn screening of birth defects at all delivery points with special focus on visible birth defects. So, those newborns identified with birth defects will be referred to higher centers for further evaluation and management. This is the first series of manuals they have launched. Subsequent manuals will deal with functional defects like vision or hearing impairment and metabolic defects like hemoglobinopathies as well as neurodevelopmental defects associated with complications of prematurity. So, this handbook highlights a systematic approach for head-to-toe examination for visible birth defects through this pictorial tool. Syndromic analysis of congenital anomalies can be done through various databases. First is Barrister-Winter Dysmorphology Database, which comes as a phase 2 gene application. These can be purchased online. Second is POSSUM, that is Pictures of Standard Syndromes and Undiagnosed Malformations. These can also be purchased online. Third is OMIM, that is Online Mendelian Inheritance in Man. This is freely available. Now, coming to specific genetic testing, these can be done as per the clinical indications of the baby. Karyotyping is done if we are suspecting chromosomal anomalies in advanced parental age and baby is having multiple congenital malformations. Cytogenetic microarray study is indicated in case of microdeletions or microduplications. Fluorescent in situ hybridization and multiplex ligation dependent probe amplification is indicated in phenotype of microdeletion like Williams syndrome or Dijos syndrome. Single gene mutation analysis is indicated if there is history of single gene disorder in the family. This is basically a PCR based test like whole exome sequencing and clinical exome sequencing. Biochemical testing is indicated in metabolic disorders like Smith-Lamelley-Opitz syndrome. Coming to genetic counseling, this is a communication process for better understanding of medical, psychological and reproductive consequences of the genetic diseases. This allows informed decision making by communicating accurate and complete information and also helps coping up the individual with genetic diseases by presenting diagnostic and therapeutic options. So, genetic counseling is all about answering 3 questions. Why did a specific genetic disease happen? Will it happen again? And what can be done? So, the most important component of genetic counseling is telling risk of recurrence. For this, a detailed 3-generation pedigree analysis should be done. So, this is the pedigree chart. On this pedigree, a vertical transmission pattern is observed. And this disease doesn't skip generation. Also equal male and female incidence is there. So this pedigree is a case of autosomal dominant heterozygous affected patient. In case of single gene disorders, risk of recurrence is decided on the basis of mode of inheritance, so pedigree analysis should be done. And deformation and disruptions have very low risk of recurrence. De novo chromosomal abnormalities or microdeletions have less than 1% risk of recurrence, while there is variable recurrence risk in case of familial chromosomal rearrangement. In all these cases, we should offer prenatal diagnosis to all parents. Now, coming to a prevention of congenital birth defects. Birth defects have a significant genetic component which makes these conditions incurable, but low-cost preventive interventions are available. So, prevention can be done at the 3 levels, that is primary, secondary or tertiary. In primary prevention, preventive measures are applied in high-risk population, that is education of adolescent females, newly married women and women in antenatal care about promotion of healthy pregnancy, counseling on balanced diet rich in folate, iodine, iron, reducing environmental risk like exposure to agricultural chemicals, avoiding tobacco and alcohol, treatment of vaginal infections, immunization of rubella and varicella, and controlling diabetes prior to and during pregnancy, and counseling about effective family planning. Under secondary prevention, we have to screen and treat disease early. So there should be screening of all pregnant females of syphilis, diabetes, hypertension, varicella and rubella. Testing for chromosomal defects is done in case of advanced parental age. Carrier detection and prenatal tests are required if a family is having history of single gene disorder. Under tertiary prevention, limitation of disability and rehabilitation is done as transfusion is indicated at blood banks for thalassemia, and psychosocial support should be provided to all through various organizations. So management of all these cases require multidisciplinary approach. So all our mentioned cases would have not been managed without the help of elite super specialities of our institute. So here is a brief review of some interesting cases from our NICU and their multidisciplinary management by Dr. Fauzia. Thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Preeti, and good morning everyone. So proceeding with case presentation, a preterm baby born to a primary mother by emergent LSCS indication being decreased fetal movement. And mother was known case of seizure disorder for which mother had received oral levetiracetam.
And there was history of delayed cry, and baby presented at day 11 of life with complaints of poor feeding, respiratory distress and frequent apnea. On anthropometric examination, baby had length and weight at less than 3rd centile for gestational age, and head circumference was between 3rd and 10th centile, and there were no obvious facial dysmorphism apart from light colored skin. On systemic examination, there was marked finding in CNS systemic examination in the form of gross decrease in both axial and appendicular tone, and there was decreased sucking and swallowing, and this image is showing a baby with classical frog-legged posture. So the overall impression was that of a case of central hypotonia. Coming to cause during NICU stay, so the predominant finding were frequent apnea, for which baby had received respiratory support, and poor feeding, for which baby was started on orogastric feed. And there were other comorbidities which were also taken care of. So this baby was a preterm baby who presented to us with features of central hypotonia. So coming to differentials, which include preterm brain injury, then intrauterine infection because this baby was small for gestational age, and chromosomal anomalies, then metabolic disorders which was ruled out by expanded spectrum TMS, then teratogenic effect, but in this case mother had received tab levetiracetam, which is a category C drug in pregnancy, and the dose was 1000 milligram, which was well within the recommended dose by WHO. Then endocrinal causes, particularly hypothyroidism, which was again ruled out, and central nervous system malformations were ruled out by cranial MRI. So coming to management and case progression, baby was started on early stimulation and intervention program, including physiotherapy and oromotor stimulation, and baby was discharged at day 40 of life, but baby continued to have hypotonia and poor feeding, and there was persistent requirement for gavage feeding. And this was the dysmorphic facies of baby at 4 months of age, showing characteristic almond-shaped palpebral fissure, downturned and rounded mouth with downturned angle of mouth and tapering fingers, and the characteristic frog-legged posture. So as a part of genetic evaluation, MLPA was sent, which showed deletion of 15q11.2, confirming the diagnosis of Prader-Willi syndrome, and genetic counseling offered to parents, and baby was planned for multidisciplinary management. However, baby developed recurrent infection and baby succumbed to COVID pneumonia at 6.5 months of age. So coming to learning points, in any baby with hypotonia, serial and comprehensive neurological evaluation should be done, because in this case baby was diagnosed on follow-up. Then in neonatal period, features of dysmorphism might be subtle, so careful clinical examination is of utmost importance. Then any neonate with pronounced hypotonia is a candidate for genetic evaluation. This was a case series on 20 babies with Prader-Willi syndrome, and all 20 infants required feeding tube. So hypotonia with recurrent apnea and feeding difficulty is a characteristic feature of Prader-Willi syndrome. And treatment improved, and early treatment and physiotherapy is very important because it can prevent growth retardation and obesity. Coming to case number 2. A preterm baby born to gravida to mother by emergent LSCS, indication being fetal distress. There was history of consanguinity, and there was history of one previous intrauterine death. And antenatal scan, the significant finding was that of narrow thorax with short long bones. Anthropometry was marked for large head, which was out of proportion to length and weight, and head circumference was at 90th centile for gestational age, and at birth baby had severe respiratory distress, and baby was intubated and mechanically ventilated. So on physical examination, there was marked facial dysmorphism in the form of large occiput, there was narrow thorax, there was rhizomelia and postaxial polydactyly. And this was the radiograph of baby showing long narrow thorax with short horizontal ribs and white out lung filled, and the telephone receiver femoral shaft, which is a characteristic feature of ciliary disruption in skeletal dysplasia. So, baby had severe respiratory distress for which baby was mechanically ventilated and baby required multiple doses of surfactant. Despite of that, baby had persistent oxygenation defect for which baby was shifted to HFO mode of ventilation. However, despite of aggressive management, baby expired at 36 hours of life. So this was a dysmorphic baby with characteristic narrow thorax and severe respiratory distress with a previous history of intrauterine death. So most probable diagnosis was skeletal dysplasia, and lower down in differentials come congenital pneumonia, which was ruled out because there were no antenatal risk factor, and dysmorphism is not a part of congenital pneumonia. Then neuromuscular disorders were also ruled out because usually neuromuscular disorder, they do not have oxygenation problem and they are well managed with adequate respiratory support. Then genetic disorders of surfactant deficiency were also ruled out because these are seen in term babies and they also lack features of dysmorphism. As a part of genetic evaluation, clinical exome sequencing was done, which showed WDR34 gene mutation at exon 7, which causes short rib thoracic dysplasia 11 with or without polydactyly. It is a form of ciliopathy that interrupts in sonic hedgehog pathway that plays an important role in skeletal development. So coming to learning points, antenatal ultrasound and history of consanguinity are important clue for diagnosis of skeletal dysplasia, and exome sequencing is important for confirming diagnosis as well as for counseling for future pregnancy. So coming to case number 3. A term baby born to a second gravida mother by elective cesarean section, indication being increasing left-sided pleural effusion. And the antenatal period was eventful for fetal left-sided pleural effusion, for which fetal thoracocentesis was done at 35 weeks plus 6 days of gestation by MRH and pediatric surgery team of SGPGIMS. So on examination, all the 3 anthropometric parameters were less than 3rd centile, and the baby had tachypnea for which and respiratory labored breathing for which baby had received CPAP mode of respiratory support. And on clinical examination, baby had dysmorphic facies in the form of sign or face, bushy eyebrows, long eyelashes, depressed nasal bridge, anteverted near, smooth long philtrum. Baby also had high arched palate, clinodactyly, nail hypoplasia and cutis murmurata. So these were the classical features of Cornelia-de Lange syndrome, and systemic examination was significant for finding of decreased air entry on left side, and radiograph and USG thorax were suggestive of left-sided pleural effusion for which intercostal tube drainage was done, and pleural fluid investigations were sent which were suggestive of chylothorax. So this was a case of dysmorphic baby with congenital chylothorax. So initially intercostal tube drainage was done, and when chylothorax was confirmed at day 3 of life, octreotide infusion was started aiming to decrease chyle formation, and nutritional modification in the form of low fat skimmed milk with coconut oil, that is a rich source of MCT oil, was started. With this the chyle secretion was stopped and ICTD was removed on day 11th of life. Baby regained birth weight at day 23 of life and baby was discharged at day 33 of life. So in this case the diagnosis was basically based on dysmorphic features and genetic counseling, genetic testing, and genetic counseling was offered to parents. So learning points are that diagnosis of Cornelia-de Lange syndrome is mainly based on dysmorphic features, and the association of Cornelia-de Lange with congenital chylothorax is very rare, and skimmed milk based formulation along with coconut oil is an affordable alternative to other formulas. So this was a systematic analysis on 753 cases from 1990 to 2018, and out of 753 cases only 1 case of congenital chylothorax was associated with Cornelia-de Lange syndrome. So the association is very, very rare. So these These case reports were published recently in Neo Reviews section of American Academy of Pediatrics and the Indian Journal of Pediatrics. Coming to case number 4, a preterm baby born to 34 years gravida 3 mother by preterm vaginal delivery. Early postnatal period was uneventful and baby was admitted at day 20 of life with signs of dehydration and fast breathing. On examination, all the 3 anthropometric parameters were at less than 3rd centile and baby had signs of some dehydration with tachycardia and tachypnea. Physical examination was marked for depressed nasal bridge, Mongolian slant, broad forehead, sandal gap, short hand with short fingers, and there was ambiguous genitalia in the form of small phallus with hypospadias, with pinoscrotal hypospadias with fused labioscrotal fold and asymmetrically palpable gonad on right side. And karyotype was suggestive of trisomy 21 with XY genotype. So initially baby had received dehydration and electrolyte correction, and baby was other comorbidities were also taken care of, and as this baby had ambiguous genitalia, along with that baby had presented to us with features of signs of dehydration, hyponatremia, hyperkalemia and metabolic acidosis. So workup for DST and workup for CH was initiated, but the investigations were within normal limit. So baby was thought to have non-CH variant of DST. Karyotype was suggestive of trisomy 21 with XY genotype. MRI abdomen was suggestive of hematometrocolpus with likely testis and right labioscrotal fold and likely ovary on left side. So this was a baby with Down syndrome and ambiguous genitalia. Coming to differentials include ovotesticular DST, gonadal dysgenesis spectrum disorder, and a distant possibility of androgen synthesis defect was also kept. So multidisciplinary team management including pediatric endocrinology, genetic and pediatric surgery opinion was taken, and genetic counseling offered to parents, and laparotomy is planned for histopathological examination of gonadal tissue for final diagnosis and confirmation. So this was a case series of 188 babies. Out of 188 babies with Down syndrome, only 3 babies had DST, 1 had mixed gonadal dysgenesis, 1 had 47X6 genotype with testicular DST, and 1 had XY complete gonadal dysgenesis. So coming to other interesting cases in our NICU in brief. This was an outborn baby who was delivered by normal vaginal delivery, and baby had presented to us with features of post-axial polydactyly in all 4 limbs, midline swelling above umbilicus and absent vaginal opening. And USG abdomen was suggestive of hydrometrocolpus, which was drained by pediatric surgery team, and genetic genetic opinion was taken, and as the baby had post-axial polydactyly with vaginal atresia with the hydrometrocolpus, so baby was investigated in lines of McCorsick-Kaufman syndrome and Bardet-Biedl syndrome spectrum disorder. However, the definitive mutation was not found and the definitive diagnosis has not made yet. And this was the image of the baby on follow-up, which shows characteristic narrow thorax with post-axial polydactyly. So this was again an inborn baby who presented to us at 2.5 months of age with features of respiratory distress, and X-ray thorax was X-ray was suggestive of hyperinflation of left side with shifting of mediastinum to right side. It was more of like congenital lobar emphysema, and there was antenatal history of a cyst in left hemithorax, but there were no finding of pulmonary hypoplasia or mediastinal shift. And a CECT thorax, a large cyst on left hemithorax compressing left main bronchus was found. So these arrows are pointing to left main bronchus, here is right main bronchus, and it is esophagus. So basically this baby had bronchogenic cyst with compressive symptoms, and the baby was managed by pediatric surgery. Posterolateral thoracotomy with cyst removal was done by pediatric surgery team. So this was again an outborn baby who presented to us at day 5 of life with vomiting, bilious vomiting and abdominal distension, and X-ray showed dilated bowel loops with nasogastric tube on right side of the abdomen, and USG finding was marked for liver on left side of abdomen and spleen, multiple splenic tissue on right side of the abdomen. So this baby and echo was suggestive of levocardia. So basically this baby had clinical situs inversus with levocardia and with features of intestinal obstruction, and this case was managed by pediatric surgery team. Intra-op finding were suggestive of jejunal atresia with malrotation, for which anastomosis and ligation were, for which resection and anastomosis were done, and there were multiple spleen on right side of abdomen. So this was basically a case of situs inversus with polysplenia with jejunal atresia with malrotation, and these were published in International Journal of Surgery. This was again a case, mother was referred at 24 weeks of gestation to MRH department because of gross fetal hydroureteronephrosis, and at 29 weeks of gestation due to increasing hydroureteronephrosis and presence of thick-walled bladder and constricted bladder neck, vesicoamniotic shunt was done, and at birth baby had multiple loose fold of skin, and there is vesicoamniotic shunt in situ, and as a part of evaluation VCUG was done, which showed grossly dilated posterior urethra with grade 5 VUR on right side. So this was a case of PUV, posterior urethral valve with right sided VUR, that was managed by urology team. Cystoscopy and fulguration of the valve was done. This was again an outborn baby who has presented to us at day 16 of life with complaints of decreased movement of all 4 limbs, and on examination baby had short stubby appearance, umbilical hernia and limited movement of all 4 limbs, and radiograph were suggestive of bilateral femoral shaft fracture and fracture of left ulna, and metabolic bone profile and PTH and vitamin D3 were within normal limit, and as a part of evaluation whole exome sequencing was sent, which was suggestive of COL1A2 gene mutation, confirming the diagnosis of osteogenesis imperfecta. This was again a baby with a history of antenatal high drops. However, hemolytic, cardiac and infectious causes were ruled out, and at birth baby had marked facial dysmorphism in the form of broad forehead, depressed nasal bridge, hypertrophy of gums and hepatosplenomegaly, and characteristic stippled calcification at the end of long bone. So baby was thought to have complex molecular disorder like mucopolysaccharidosis and galactosialidosis, and whole exome sequencing report was suggestive of CTSA gene mutation that causes galactosialidosis. This was again another baby who presented to us with hypoplastic nasal septum and stippled calcification at ankle joint, and there was history of maternal warfarin intake during first trimester. So the baby was diagnosed to have fetal warfarin syndrome. So now I will be inviting Dr. Priyanka for data presentation from our institute. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fawzia. Good morning, one and all. Hereby, I'll be taking you through SGPGI's experience and profile of congenital birth defects in Department of Neonatology. Our screening population include all inborn and outborn neonates admitted in the NICU of SGPGI-MS over a span of 7 years, that is from 2014 to 2021. Retrospectively, this data is collected retrospectively from electronic and hospital medical record system, and stillbirths were not included in this data. Results showed a total of 3,734 neonates were screened, of which 374 babies are identified with congenital birth defects, and the prevalence is 10% in our cohort. Looking into the baseline neonatal characteristics, 61% of our cohort include outborn neonates, and the median age at admission was 4 days, and median gestational age at birth was 37 weeks, and the median birth weight was 2.68 kg, of which 79% are appropriate for gestational age, and 19% were small for gestational age, and 1.1% were large for gestational age. In this cohort, 62% of babies were male, and 2.4% babies had ambiguous genitalia. Looking into the maternal risk factors associated with congenital birth defects, oligohydramnios was noted to be the most common risk factor associated, followed by bad obstetric history and unbooked case and gestational diabetes mellitus. Whereas advanced maternal age, that is more than 35 years, is seen in 9.8% of cases, and history of artificial reproductive techniques was seen in 6% of our cases. And his 4% cases had history of consanguinity. However, family history of congenital anomalies is seen in only 2.6% of cases, and history of potential exposure to teratogens is seen in 2.9% of our cases. Looking into the distribution of drugs in the cases with history of teratogen exposure, most common medication identified was noted was homeopathic medicine, followed by anti-epileptics and warfarin intake. Looking into the frequency of congenital malformations, cardiovascular anomalies were the most frequent birth defect noted in our study, followed by gastrointestinal tract malformations and genitourinary malformations. Cardiovascular system anomalies are more common because the more number of babies with congenital heart defects are being referred to our institute because pediatric cardiology facilities are not available elsewhere in the state. This pie diagram shows the distribution of cases in cardiovascular system. The most common defects were septal defects, followed by cyanotic congenital heart disease and complex congenital heart disease. Many of the congenital heart disease cases are managed with the help of pediatric cardiology and CTVS department. We had successfully managed case of TGA and TAPVC earlier, and currently we have a case of term neonate with PDA who was operated for ligation and currently doing well in our NICU. This other pie diagram, second diagram, shows the distribution of gastrointestinal cases. The most common anomaly noted was tracheoesophageal fistula, followed by biliary atresia and congenital diaphragmatic hernia. Distribution of genitourinary cases showed most common anomaly to be hydroureteronephrosis, followed by posterurethral valve and multicystic dysplastic kidney. Final outcome of our cohort shows that 32% of neonates succumbed to death. This includes death is taken as a proxy marker for patients who left against medical advice, and 67% survival rate is seen. This includes the patients who are referred to other center. Looking into the underlying morbidities associated with death, the most common anomaly identified was congenital heart defects, followed by tracheoesophageal fistula and congenital diaphragmatic hernia. Coming to the discussion part, a recent study published by Sinha et al. In 2022, this was an observational cross-sectional study over 1 year done at KGMU, showed an incidence of 1.3%, and the most common defects identified were musculoskeletal and CNS anomalies, and death rate in this cohort is 30.5%. And a surveillance data published by Ian Zhou et al. In 2020. This data was collected from the year 2014 to 2018, showed a prevalence of 71.5 per 1,000 live births, and the most common defects were cardiovascular and GIT anomalies similar to our cohort. And a meta-analysis published by Bide et al. In 2018 showed a pooled prevalence of 184 per 1,000 live births. This meta-analysis includes 52 hospital-based studies and 3 community-based studies. And the most common defects noted were anencephaly and talipes. In our cohort done at SGPGI over 7 years showed a prevalence of 10%, and the most common anomalies were cardiovascular and GIT as earlier told, and death rate was 32%. We got the opportunity to present our data in 2 of the international journals, Fetal and Neonatal Workshop conducted in 2022 and British Association of Perinatal Medicine Conference held in 2022. To conclude, in low and middle income countries with the control of infectious diseases, mortality and morbidity due to congenital anomalies is likely to increase. With the establishment of Southeast Asia Regional Office for Newborn Birth Defect Database, will provide true magnitude of congenital birth defects in the country. And a significant number of congenital anomalies can be prevented with low-cost primary care preventive strategies like periconceptional folic acid supplementation. And the outcome of these babies with congenital birth defects can be improved with multidisciplinary approach, and genetic counseling is an integral part of management of these babies. We acknowledge all neonates and their caregivers and all our mentors, colleagues and entire team of NICU and Department of Pediatric Surgery, Pediatric Endocrinology, Pediatric Gastroenterology and all other elite pediatric super specialties, and Department of MRH, Department of Medical Genetics, Radiodiagnosis and Physiotherapy for helping us in managing all these cases. Thank you.